welcome everyone. Today's Lunch and Learn is about clinical trials, research, and the importance of your participation. We'll be covering topics for all ages, and we'll hear from several incredible guest speakers who all will be sharing important information and updates about their clinical trials. We will start with our research coordinator, Brittany Nelson. She is from Ances Bioimaging Lab at Washington University, and she will be talking about the importance of participating in studies and how you can benefit from those studies. Brittany and her colleague, Liz Westerhouse, will also report on their studies as well.
Thanks for the introduction, Linda. Yep, I'm Brittany Nelson. I work with Dr. Ances in the Ances Bioimaging Lab, and we're doing several research studies with individuals with Down syndrome. But to get us started, I'm just going to kind of do a brief overview of what clinical research is. And so obviously, clinical research is a branch of medical science that evaluates the safety and effectiveness of new treatments, drugs, and medical devices through systematic investigations. The key objectives of research is to kind of enhance treatment options and outcomes, help us understand diseases better, and help develop therapies, and then gather data that's needed for government and ethical approval for new interventions so we can get new treatments for diseases. There are a couple of different types of clinical research. So there's an interventional studies and then observational studies. So interventional studies are testing new treatments or new medications and often are referred to as just generally clinical trials. And then the observational studies are typically monitoring individuals without any intervention. So we just kind of test them where they are in that point in time and then follow them throughout a period of time. Research in general is very important to create evidence-based medicine and help ensure that healthcare decisions are informed by reliable data. So without research, we just really don't know how these treatments are working or how diseases progress throughout time. So why is it important to participate in research studies? So by participating in research study, you're contributing to science, right? You're helping develop new treatments and therapies and understanding of diseases. Oftentimes, research studies are exploring novel approaches that can improve different health outcomes. It also improves patient care. So the findings that we develop from these studies help lead to better care for all patients. And then also, again, helps validate and refine treatment protocols for that healthcare providers rely on. It's also a personal empowerment, right? Like engaging in research allows individuals to take active roles in their health and wellness, and they often learn more about their conditions and treatment options, but through participating in studies. You're also contributing to public health. So again, all of these medications that we have had all had to go through research studies. So we wouldn't have, all these different treatment if we didn't have research. So people are, contributing to, community health by participating in studies. And then it also helps us understand health trends and look at different factors that affect different populations. You also get to build relationships with researchers. So it kind of helps you get a deeper understanding of the research process and then, foster relationships with universities and physicians that you're working with. So how can you directly benefit from participating in research? So you can get access to new treatments. So participants may receive cutting-edge treatments or medications that are not yet available to the general public. Some of these studies are testing new interventions that could help provide better outcomes than the standard treatments that are available currently. You also get regular checkups, right? So if you're coming in for studies, you're getting your annual visit to kind of check and see how your health is doing, or your thinking in our case is doing, and we kind of follow you along so we can see when changes are occurring. You get in-depth evaluations through these studies. So again, like you're getting neuro exams, you're getting cognitive testing, you're getting stuff like that, again, we can kind of track as time goes along. And if changes occur, then we can kind of act immediately when we start seeing those changes. You get an increased awareness, better understanding of your condition and the options that are available, and then other health-related issues that come with that condition. You also get a little bit, again, empowerment. You get to take an active role in your health decisions, and, actively participating in, finding treatment options or more information about certain diseases. Just in general, contributing to scientific advancement. So again, the data that we're collecting in these studies can help lead to breakthroughs in medical science and improve treatments. And then it also can just help improve health strategies that just benefit the community at large. And that's like real time, right? So when we're doing studies, we're seeing patients, we're learning things, and then Dr. Ances will see patients in clinic and take the information that we're learning in real time and be able to help, families and participants and patients with issues that arise, in real time, which is pretty cool. You also get some financial compensation from participating in the study. So most studies offer payment for procedures that are completed, and you can also sometimes get travel expenses covered as well. Like I was saying a little bit earlier, building relationship with the healthcare professionals. It's, working with researchers and healthcare professionals. You can kind of, again, get that first line of information and guidance. And then it's also a networking opportunity. So engaging in research can help connect with other people who are going through similar things that you and your family are going through. You also get some personal satisfaction. So just some general fulfillment that you're contributing to advancing healthcare and science. And then, it provides hope for better treatments and better outcomes for the future generations. But research can be scary, right? It can also feel intimidating and sometimes gets a bad reputation. So we try to just make it as fun as possible. We do a lot of activities when we have participants here for studies. So we play games. We have a lot of dance parties. We do karaoke. We have one participant who hates blood draws, but he's willing to give it a shot if we blare Backstreet Boys and sing along. So I have been caught dancing in an exam room and singing Backstreet Boys many times now. But we try to, again, make it as comfortable as possible. We want to make sure that the participants feel at ease throughout the process. And then they're always the boss. So if they don't want to do something, we're always listening and respecting their choices. And if they don't want to participate in a certain aspect of the study, then they don't have to. And we stop immediately whenever they say the word. So I'm constantly reminding them that they are the boss, and they usually really like that. So why this particular research matters. So I'm going to do just kind of a very brief overview of Alzheimer's disease and Down syndrome, but adults with Down syndrome are more likely to develop Alzheimer's disease due to several interconnected factors. So the genetic factor is the main concern with this. Individuals with Down syndrome have that extra copy of the 21st chromosome, and on that chromosome, it produces the gene for the amyloid precursor protein. This protein is responsible for the production of amyloid plaques, which is a hallmark of Alzheimer's disease. And so they're producing about 50% more of that protein, which is why we're seeing individuals with Down syndrome getting symptoms of Alzheimer's disease earlier at a younger age. And so, and then also in general, just age in general for everyone increases the risk of Alzheimer's disease as you get older. So many people with Down syndrome live into their 50s and beyond now. I just spoke to a participant yesterday who turned 70. With that increased age, there's always a higher risk of developing these changes in the brain. And so, speaking of this changes of the brain, these plaques, these amyloid plaques and tangles, I'm sure you've heard that just in general talking about Alzheimer's disease. That's kind of what's happening in the brain. So they're getting these amyloid and tau buildup in the brain, which is making it harder for the brain to make certain connections and for individuals to think properly. And since individuals with Down syndrome have a lower cognitive reserve compared to others, it means their brain sometimes will have less capacity to compensate for those changes. So the changes in the brain are happening, 10 to 15 years before they're showing any symptoms. But since they have, again, that lower reserve, those symptoms are kind of showing up sooner in people with Down syndrome. And then obviously, we've fixed a lot of these issues that folks with Down syndrome have. tend to have heart problems, thyroid issues, and other health concerns that could also contribute to overall cognitive decline. So all this together creates an increased risk for folks with Down syndrome to develop Alzheimer's disease as they get older. Why this research is important is because historically individuals with Down syndrome have been excluded from many clinical trials. So all the new medications that are coming out for Alzheimer's disease over the past few years have all excluded individuals with Down syndrome from their studies. So we don't know if those medications work for individuals with DS. And they're at a higher significant risk than most other people to develop Alzheimer's disease during their lifetime. And this is a really unique opportunity because they are getting it when they're younger. They, again, have less comorbidities, less other health issues than the older population who are typically developing Alzheimer's disease in their 70s and 80s. So it's a pretty pure look at the actual disease itself, right? When we can see that they don't have any other health issues and we give them a medication and they get better, we can pretty well say that it was probably that medication that helped them. And there's no other factors like high blood pressure or diabetes or any other issues like that that are involved in it. And then there's some big gaps, right? So like I was saying, there's no medications that are specifically approved for individuals with Down syndrome related to Alzheimer's disease, which is a real shame because, as many of you know, this is a big concern for our population. And so our goal is to start trying to figure out what medications would work best for them. 5 observational studies that are available right now, and I'm going to go through all of them individually, but we have the ABCDS study, or the Alzheimer Biomarker Consortium for Down Syndrome study, the Lifestyle study, the TRACK-DS study, which is the trial-ready cohort study, our umbrella study, and then a mom's study. So we've got stuff for parents too. I'm going to start with the ABCDS study. So this is for individuals with Down syndrome who are 25 years and older. The goal of this study is to kind of follow folks over time to identify the early biomarkers that might impact the onset of Alzheimer's disease. So we're looking at blood, we're looking at MRIs and PET scans, checking those proteins in the brain, and kind of following them over time to see when those changes are actually happening. This study is taking place at 10 sites across the US and the UK, and we also enroll siblings in this study too. So what's involved in the ABCDS study? So we do a cognitive testing battery. So there's several different thinking tests that we do throughout this session. And then the study partner will answer questions about the individual with Down syndrome's health history and behavior and kind of things that they're doing during the day and stuff like that. We'll do blood work and a neuro exam. So a doctor will do an exam on them, check their reflexes, check their eyes, watch them walk, stuff like that. And then there is a brain MRI that is optional. And then the PET scans, looking at those specific proteins that I was talking about, the amyloid and the tau proteins. These PET scans help us see those proteins in the brain. And then a lumbar puncture. So all 3 of those are optional to participate in this study. And then we do visits every 16 months. So we're following folks every 16 months. And then each cycle every 16 months is consistent of 2 to 3 visits. So we kind of try to break it up because we don't want to overwhelm the person with, the participant with all these different procedures. So we try to break it up so, not one day is too burdensome. And then there is reimbursement for all the procedures that are completed. And for this study, we do offer travel reimbursement. So you get mileage reimbursement, or if you're traveling from out of town, we can pay for hotels and stuff like that. And then there's a supplemental study called the Lifestyle study, and this is part of the ABCDS study. So you have to be enrolled in the ABCDS study to participate in this portion. But this is looking at different lifestyle components that might influence healthy aging. So we look at different lifestyle factors, like how well the person with Down syndrome is sleeping at night, how active they are during the day, and like how socially engaged are they? Are they going to a work program or a day program, or are they playing video games all day? We kind of want to know the differences in these factors, or how these differences in these factors are related to the differences in thinking and how the brain changes over time as they get older. So the goal for this study is to kind of find ways to potentially change lifestyle to kind of improve or enhance the aging experience in individuals with Down syndrome. We do a WatchPat, which is a sleep monitoring device, and the participants wear that for one night. And we found that about 70% of our participants are are getting diagnosed with sleep apnea. And so sleep apnea is very prevalent in the Down syndrome population. And so a lot of folks don't know that. And so we have diagnosed, we had one participant who was having trouble with work. He wasn't able to go to work anymore because he was having behavior problems. He was falling asleep. And he did the sleep study, and we determined that he had severe sleep apnea. And we got him on a CPAP machine, and he started sleeping better through the night. And now he's back to work and kind of back to his old self. And he's not having many, as much behavior problems, and he's, able to do all the stuff he needs to do at work. So it's stuff like that that really makes this research important, because this is something that, again, one simple test can actually have a great impact on your everyday life. And so we do the sleep monitoring for this study. We also do an actigraph, which is an activity monitor. So they wear kind of like a Fitbit device for 7 days. And then there's a diary that goes along with that. And that's kind of asking about, what time they went to sleep and woke up and how they slept, and then different activities that they do during the day. How much time did they spend watching TV or going to a social engagement or stuff like that. And these visits are paired with the ABCDS visits. So they're completed every 16 months, but all procedures are completed at home. So you get your kit and you guys kind of do it at home. And then from the sleep study, like I said, we receive that report that we share with you, and you can share with your doctor. And then in the event you do have sleep apnea, we help make sure you can get in to a sleep specialist and get evaluated, and potential treatment options available. So that's pretty cool. And then again, you're reimbursed for these procedures. The next study I'm going to talk about is the TRACK-DS study. So this is the trial-ready cohort. This is designed for folks who are 35 to 55 years old. And this is basically developing a well-characterized cohort that's kind of ready to enroll into treatment and prevention trials for adults with Down syndrome. So those trials are just now starting. This is kind of groundbreaking. We've been doing the TRACK-DS study for a couple of years now, but we never had an option for them to enroll in a clinical trial. But now we have two, which I'll talk about in a little bit. So this is really exciting. But this is basically something you can co-enroll with the ABCDS study. So there's no extra procedures or anything. They just take the information that we're learning from the ABCDS study and kind of characterize individuals so that when trials are available, we can kind of look at this group of people and say, these people might qualify for this study, or these people might qualify for this study. So it kind of helps us determine who would be available for what clinical trials when they become available. And then we have the umbrella study. So the umbrella study is our local study here at WashU. And this is for folks who are 18 years and older. So we kind of started this study because for the ABCDS study and the TRACK-DS study, you have to be pretty cognitively intact and able to complete a lot of cognitive tests, which can be challenging. We wanted to make sure that anyone, regardless of their level of functioning, was able to participate if they wanted to. And so we made this for 18 years and older, and we're working on making it for the younger folks, but we're not quite there yet. But we're basically following individuals with Down syndrome throughout adulthood. So we follow up with them every year or two and identify early biomarkers that may signal the onset of Alzheimer's disease. All of the procedures in this study are completely optional, so you can always do as much or as little as you'd like. And then we also enroll siblings and parents as well into this study. We do a brief cognitive test. So this is a little bit a shorter battery of testing than we do in the larger ABCDS study. Same kind of similar study partner assessments. Blood work, we're looking at stool samples, we're doing eye exams, and then we also do the activity monitor, which is similar to that lifestyle activity I talked about earlier. Like I said, these visits are completed every 1 to 2 years, and each cycle is either 1 to 2 visits, and they're usually, a couple of hours, 2 hours, and you get reimbursed for all procedures. And again, just a reminder, this study is an a la carte. So you guys, if someone doesn't like giving blood, then they don't have to do that, and they can do other portions of the study, or you can kind of just pick and choose whatever you and your loved one are comfortable with. And then our last observational study is the MOM study. So this is the modification of maternal Alzheimer's disease risk and Down syndrome. So this study is for parents, both biological moms and dads of individuals with Down syndrome who are currently enrolled in the ABCDS study. The goal of this study is to find out if there's a family history of dementia, as well as other biomarkers or parental genetic factors that might have an impact on the emergence of early signs of dementia in our participants with Down syndrome. There is also some evidence to suggest that giving birth to a child with Down syndrome might impact a mother's future risk for dementia. And this study is kind of helping us figure out, better understand why that might be the case. So we're following parents, and we do some cognitive testing and thinking tests with them, blood work, and then questionnaires. It's a one-time visit, and again, they're reimbursed for their procedures that are completed. So I have a couple of interventional studies available that are just now starting. So this is really exciting stuff. This is the first clinical trials in Down syndrome, and we've been wanting to say this for many, many years, and it's really exciting to finally be able to offer this up. So we have the ABATE AC Immune study, and then the Ionis Hero study. And then we're also in the works with other studies that are coming too, so stay tuned. The ABATE AC Immune study is looking at treatment for Alzheimer's disease. It's not yet approved. They've done testing in people who do not have Down syndrome that are suffering from early Alzheimer's disease. And now we're looking at it in people with Down syndrome. So we're looking for about 80 people who will participate, and we've got 3 countries involved. Treatment that they're using for this is called ACI 24.060. And this is teaching the body's immune system to kind of get rid of the amyloid clumps, similar to like a vaccine, like the COVID vaccine or a flu shot, helps clear your body of infections. It's working on that same kind of mechanism. For this study, they'll receive either the study drug or an active treatment called a placebo. No one knows which treatment, either the actual study drug or the placebo that a participant will receive. It's a 2-to-1 ratio, so the odds are in your favor of potentially getting the treatment. And then once you get past all the screening period tests, then you would go into the treatment period, and this lasts about 1.5 years. You get 6 injections of the study drug or the placebo throughout that 1.5 years. And then there's a follow-up period of about 6 months that we kind of just follow up to make sure, check in on your health status, and then see how the treatment is working in your body. And then the next study we have is the Ionis Hero study. So this is, again, looking for a treatment for Alzheimer's disease. It has not been approved yet. This study is the first study in humans, which is pretty exciting. And it is using a study medicine called Ione 269. And this is helping people with Down syndrome by telling their brains to make less of that amyloid. So since, again, like I said earlier, they're producing 50% more of that amyloid, this medication is kind of slowing that process down, so they're not making as much. There's not enough, there's not more, there's less amyloid that is depositing into the brain. And this would theoretically slow down or prevent Alzheimer's disease symptoms as they get older. So again, this is investigational, means we're trying to find out if it's safe and if it works. It's not approved by agencies like the FDA at this time. And this is selectively targeting the APP, which is the amyloid precursor protein for degradation. So it's reducing that protein in the brain as well as its processing products. The medicine will be injected into the space around your lower spine through a lumbar puncture. The injection takes only a few minutes, and we can always give medication to make it more comfortable for the lumbar puncture. And then everyone in this study who gets enrolled will receive the medication. So there's no placebo for this study. And so who can participate? Again, 35 to 55. So they're taking folks that are a little bit older in this study as well. And you have to have evidence of amyloid pathology on your PET scans. So previous PET scans, if we've done studies before, we can use that, or you would do PET scans through the screening process to make sure that you have a certain amount of that amyloid in the brain. There's that fine line where you have to have a certain amount of amyloid, but you can't have symptoms of dementia quite yet. So the screening period for this can take up to about 3 months. Again, we do several health checks during that period, including exams, blood and urine samples. We take pictures of your brain with the MRI and the PET scans, and then there's several questionnaires that go involved in that. Once you make it through the screening period, you would go into the treatment period, which lasts about 9 months. So they get the injection in their lower back, and then they visit the study clinic 9 times for health checks that are similar to the tests that we did in the screening. So you would get more MRIs and PET scans throughout the study. The participants would get 4 lumbar punctures during the treatment period. So only 1 injection of the medication, though. So the first lumbar puncture, you would inject the medication, and then the following lumbar punctures would be checking the levels of amyloid in the cerebral spinal fluid. So you only get one dose of the medication. And then the follow-up period for this study is about 6 months. So we do some phone calls and then a clinic visit to just check for final health checks at the very end. I can't underestimate how important these studies are and how really incredible that we have these options available for this population. So this is extremely, I mean, we're on the forefront of science here, which is really exciting. This has never been done before in folks with Down syndrome. We're the only site in Missouri and the Midwest and one of the few globally that are doing studies like this. And these insights that we're gaining from these studies is directly enhancing the care that we provide for our patients. So, when we find out, more about these medications, then we can, eventually prescribe this medication for participants and help, these studies are helping us learn when would you start giving this medication, and all these different things. So these studies are really important in figuring out how we can kind of combat Alzheimer's disease in folks with Down syndrome. And again, the participation of folks with Down syndrome in studies like these is not only beneficial for them, but also for the general population. So these medications that we're learning that are working in folks with Down syndrome can then translate to other individuals who might be suffering from Alzheimer's disease in the future. It's really exciting stuff. It's kind of scary, but it's really exciting. If you want more information, because I know I went through all this very quickly, you can reach out to me. My information is on this slide. You can also follow us on social media, and then we have information on our website about the studies as well. There's also recordings of the previous talks that we've done, kind of describing some of these studies.
We have Dr. Selena Washington from Washington University, and she has researched adults aging with Down syndrome and the prevalence of fall incidence and cognitive decline.
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Linda, for the introduction. I will be before you for a short period of time. I just want to talk about a study we did over this past year and some of the outcomes from that. And yeah, we'll move forward from here. So I'm going to talk about falls and dementia risk in adults with Down syndrome and give you a little bit of background about how we came to this particular inquiry and what we found out. So just a quick snippet about me. So I do a dual role. I'm an associate professor at St. Louis University, but my research is very heavily based with my mentors, Dr. Susie Stark and Dr. Bo Ances. And I'm also a scholar within the Knight Alzheimer's Disease and Research Center at Washington University. And I received a supplement grant from the NIH to do this work. And so here's a little bit of the background about why I initially was interested in this work. I am an occupational therapist by trade. So I started in schools working with children with Down syndrome, all the way up to now working with adults and aging adults with Down syndrome. So my career has been a part of within this community for almost 20 years, or over 20 years actually. And so this is what we know. We know that nearly all adults with Down syndrome will develop the neuropathological features of Alzheimer's disease. And so when we say neuropathological, we're talking about abnormalities that are affecting the nervous system, in this particular case, the brain. Alzheimer's disease in adults with DS increases with age, as Britt mentioned before, and it's marked by things like confusion, short-term memory issues, and a reduction of the ability to complete activities of daily living. And so evidence also suggests that motor impairment and an increase of falls may precede cognitive impairment and mark Alzheimer's disease symptoms. So what we know, and based off of Dr. Stark and Dr. Ances' work within the older adult, just a typical older adult population, is that falls and what we call preclinical Alzheimer's disease, and that's that stage before you get formally diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. What is noticed with falls is that people who have that preclinical, in that preclinical area, 3 out of 4 of them are falling. And then once they get to the clinical or diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease, it's almost 3.5 that are falling more regularly. And so because we know this about the general older adult population, we wanted to see if the same thing was trending or happening within our adults who are aging with Down syndrome. So that's what led to our initial inquiry. So the purpose of this particular study program, we wanted to examine fall incidents, falling to the ground, and functional mobility. So when we say functional mobility, we're talking about gait, balance, walking, doing those types of things. And also strength has a factor within that as well, among aging adults with DS and their relationship with dementia risk. So this is one of those observational studies that Britt was talking about. We're not necessarily implementing anything. However, we want to observe what is naturally occurring within the home, within the community. And so our first aim was to look at fall risk. Okay. And so we looked at areas of fall risk, and we wanted to know what is happening with fall risk and functional mobility in adults aging with DS. And then our second aim is look at the prevalence of falls. So how many times people are having trip incidents and what is happening within the home. And so our hypothesis, our thought is that similar to older adult populations, falls and impaired functional mobility in adults aging with DS may represent a sign of dementia risk and possible cognitive impairment. So this is what we looked at as far as including people within our study program. We wanted to get adults who were in the community, active, working, and we wanted to specifically look at adults who were 25 and older. This corresponded with some of the other studies that have been done with adults who are aging with DS. Because aging is accelerated within this population, we wanted to make sure that we were able to capture adults who were still young adults, but then move up from that point. They needed to be cognitively stable or have a mild cognitive impairment. We were able to include those adults as well and their willingness to participate within our study. And so we wanted to make sure that they were able to understand what we were asking of them. And so we did include adults who had an IQ higher than 30 and then did not have a clinical diagnosis of dementia. And so what did we include? Okay, so what we looked at was we completed a one-time home visit where we did a series of assessments. We'll talk about that in just a minute. And we had, is where we looked at different areas of function. And we asked our participants for 9 months to keep a record of anything that happened in relation to falls or fall incidents. And so we gave them a calendar. Most of our participants were really helpful, and they were able to just stick that calendar somewhere where they always look. We usually ask them to put it on the refrigerator because you're always looking towards a refrigerator for something. And during a 28 to 30 day calendar period, we would give them a call and we would ask them monthly, did you experience any fall incidents? Where was it? What time of day was it? What was happening within the environment? And so this is how we looked at the prevalence, the rate or the number of falls that was happening within our number of participants. And so we tracked them for 9 months. The reason why it was so short, because this was a supplement that just happened over a year span. And so we wanted to get a quick snapshot of what was going on. And for our participants and their families' time, we reported, of course, the fall risk. We offered them an incentive of $10. And then we also gave them a report card of their evaluation results, because we wanted them to know that if something was going on in these areas that you see here in terms of balance or strength or vision, home hazards, sensation, or medications that would pose as a fall risk, the areas that are colored before you, we would want them to probe into that further with their physician. So we looked at strength, specifically grip strength. Grip strength and falls are related to each other. And so we took a snapshot of that. We looked at balance and we looked at gait. And so those things also play a factor in functional mobility and fall risk. And we looked at dementia risk, right? And so we were able to do a questionnaire, self-reported, but it looked at areas of function. It looked at, of course, memory, confusion, loss of skills. Maybe at one point they did a certain activity, now they have no interest in it, social withdrawal, behavioral symptoms, um, physical symptoms, and as far as being able to do certain tasks within the day, sleep disturbance, and speech abnormalities. So that was looked at the dementia risk. Muscle strength, gait speed, functional capacity. So just the ability to do just day-to-day normal activities of daily living, getting themselves dressed, possibly going to work, whatever that may entail. We also took a inventory of their fear of falling. And so some of our participants had hesitancy, or they didn't do certain things because their fear of falling it overrode those activities. And so they preferred to opt out. And so we asked the caregiver as well as the participant, if possible, what were those things and what was their level of fear with doing those things. And then we also looked at the home. As we know, the home is important. Most of the time is spent there. And we looked at any type of hazards that could be posed as a fall risk. We were able to get 19 participants who were very just, willing to participate, and we didn't have any problems as far as getting monthly calls or and people and families and our adults with DS were very excited to be a part of this study. So 10 men and 9 women with a mean age of 39 years. And so this is what we found out by looking at the data. Participants reported fall incidents during our study or had a fall history prior to our study. We noticed that they had an increased number of those dementia risks. Okay. And they had a slower walking speed. So whereas we're walking normally, maybe their speed was a little bit less. And so it could be part of some gait abnormalities, walking abnormalities. And so within our assessment, we noticed that people who had a slower walking pace had a higher fall incidences. And then impaired balance. And so when we looked at balance, that was also connected to the higher fall incidence and also a prior history of falls. Participants that reported increased fear of falling, so that fear of doing things because they think they may fall or lose their balance, that was related to a decreased leg and lower body strength when we did that one-time assessment. Again, that's slower walking speed, and then also that impaired balance. And so we're showing some strong correlations, or what we call relationships, between these factors. Because this was a pilot study, this gives us information to move forward and to dig deeper and to see how these things are connected. I definitely want to thank the Down Syndrome Association for their partnership and just letting me be a part of their organization, their community, just to spread the word over the last year and some change. And then also being able to contribute to make sure that the health of our adults, and from young to old, is being closely watched. And then also we are giving back as we are also getting information from the community. Thank you all.
All right, so our next speakers will be Dr. Marie Channell and Dr. Lori Mattie from the University of Illinois. So now we have something happening on the Illinois side for everyone. So they have projects going for both adults and our younger kids. So I will let them get started on their projects.
Thank you so much for having us. I'm Marie Channell, and I'll be speaking to you along with my good friend and colleague, Dr. Laura Mattie. And as the introduction just said, we're both researchers at the University of Illinois. And we'll tell you about 2 of our current active studies that we're doing together. The one is called Autism Screening Tools for Down Syndrome, which I'll overview first. And the other one is called the Speech Accessibility Project, which Dr. Mattie will tell you about in a minute. So starting with the autism screening tools and Down syndrome, people with Down syndrome can also have autism. And in fact, it's more common than most people think. If you look at the general population, the rate of autism is about close to 3%. And if you look in those with Down syndrome, it's upwards of 19%. You see higher rates when we screen for and evaluate autism in research studies. So we're actually looking for it. In the community, we find lower rates because it's being underdiagnosed in most communities. And in fact, a recent research study looked at children with Down syndrome who already have the diagnosis of co-occurring autism, and they found that their caregivers said that it took them on average over 4.5 years to get the diagnosis from the time that they first had concerns. And this is a big problem because a lot of development happens in 4+ years, and that results in delayed access to additional services and supports. One of the reasons it's underdiagnosed is that many families and healthcare providers aren't aware of how common autism is in Down syndrome. So it can be really easy for providers to assume that all developmental and behavioral differences are due to the Down syndrome, rather than considering a potential dual diagnosis of autism as well. Another big reason it's underdiagnosed is that autism looks different in people who have Down syndrome and intellectual disability. The screening tools that we have were not designed for this population, and the diagnostic guidelines can be challenging to apply. It requires a highly specialized expertise. And if you think about it, this makes sense. You have to consider the different ways that autism can manifest and the developmental differences that are due to Down syndrome and intellectual disability, and then figure out where this overlap may occur, and then determine what observable behaviors are signs of this overlap. So of course, it requires specialized expertise, but this also creates an access barrier because there aren't many of these specialists. So it can be really hard for families to access them. They often have to travel long distances to a clinic and wait for a long time on a wait list. There are financial barriers and time constraints as well. So what we're doing is we're seeking to overcome some of these challenges through our current research study. And this study is a collaboration between Dr. Mattie and me with colleagues at Emory University, at Johns Hopkins University, and the Kennedy Krieger Institute. And it's funded by the NIH Down Syndrome Include initiative. And we have 3 aims of the study. So our 3 goals are: 1, to evaluate autism screeners in a nationwide sample of children with Down syndrome. 2, to characterize autism profiles across the spectrum of abilities in Down syndrome. And 3, we follow up with a few of our families in the study to conduct a smaller pilot study to explore the use of telehealth for a full diagnostic evaluation of autism and Down syndrome. And we're still enrolling families in our study through the end of this year. So I want to tell you what it's like to participate. So first of all, who can participate in this study? This one is for caregivers of children with Down syndrome, 6 to 18 years old. And the child does not need to have autism to participate. We actually need to represent the range of children with Down syndrome, both with and without autism, and that we do that so that we can figure out with our autism screeners what kinds of questions are sort of applicable to most children with Down syndrome and which ones really differentiate those who also have autism. What do participants do in the study? They complete an online survey that includes developmental questionnaires, family history, and health information. And you can complete these at your own pace at home because they're online. And we do compensate families for their time and also provide a resource sheet at the end of the study. And the why for this study is so that we can customize autism screeners for children with Down syndrome. And why this matters, by improving the autism screening and diagnostic process for people with Down syndrome and intellectual disability, we can increase access to appropriate and timely care and provide improve long-term outcomes and quality of life for the individuals. I'm going to turn it over now to Dr. Mattie, who will tell you about the Speech Accessibility Project.
Thank you, Marie. So as Marie mentioned, I'm Dr. Laura Mattie. I'm going to talk about the Speech Accessibility Project, which is a partnership funded by Amazon, Apple, Google, Meta, so the parent company for Facebook, and Microsoft. So before I start, just if anyone can give a little reaction of in the past week, how often have you used a digital assistant like Siri or Alexa, or used voice recognition to make a text? How often when you use it, does it misunderstand you? Do people feel like thumbs up, it's a lot, thumbs down, it's a little, thumbs up, it's a lot? Yeah, so speech recognition or automated voice recognition technology is an imperfect science. And so that's what we're trying to work on in this project. Next slide, please, Marie. So this slide is going to just show you a summary of published research on speech recognition error rates from a large vocabulary database from 2008 to 2023. And so in 2008, Hasegawa Johnson, who is the lead on the Speech Accessibility Project, and his colleagues published the first speech database, which consisted of 15 speakers with spastic dysarthria or mixed dysarthria that was secondary to cerebral palsy. And so as a reminder, dysarthria is simply just a difficulty in articulating words. This was the first time that we had these individuals with this difficulty with articulation being included in this automatic speech recognition. And you'll note that over the years, the error rates for those who have not much difficulty articulating speech has approached an error rate that's really small. So less than 2%, they're getting it right? That automatic technology gets what we're saying right. But when you look at those who have difficulty articulating words, this error rate really hasn't changed very much. And it's remained quite high. And this is because until 2023, that 15 people study was the largest publicly available database of people who had difficulty articulating words. So the question is, how do we change this? We need a bigger database. And in the last 5 to 10 years, lots of big companies have tried to do this. If anyone participated in Project Understood or Project Euphonia, this was part of that push. And if you participated in those studies, you may have wondered what happened to those projects. Well, there was a lot of participant fatigue, and automatic speech recognition is not successful without a lot of diverse speech samples. So in a surprising turn of events, our traditional competitors of Amazon, Apple, Google, and Meta, and Microsoft agreed to a partnership to solve this problem by supporting the research experts in this field to create the database. And this is where we get the Speech Accessibility Project. So what is the goal? Our goal is to build a secure pipeline to share diverse voices to improve the representation of diversity of speech patterns. Basically, we're making speech recognition more accessible. And we do this by using technology. So artificial intelligence and machine learning allow us to use speech recognition, so those voice assistants and translating tools. But because it's powered by machine learning, if we don't have diverse representative voices and speech, then the machine learning can't really work and learn how to understand this different speech pattern. So our project aims to change that by creating a database to more effectively train those machine learning models. And so when we talk about diverse speech patterns, we're not just talking about people with Down syndrome. We're also getting speech recordings from people with Parkinson's disease, ALS, cerebral palsy, and stroke. Our goal is to get speech recordings from at least 300 people in each group, and if possible, 400 to 500. And this is what really lets the machine learning models work. Who can participate in this project? Any adult with Down syndrome who is over the age of 18. This is an online interactive study. So participants sit at home and they record samples, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And we give participants over 3 months. They really can do it at their own pace. Of course, there's a little flexibility here. So if something comes up and you need a little more time, we usually are able to accommodate that. And then again, we're trying to improve speech recognition technology for people with Down syndrome and people with diverse speech patterns broadly. So what does participation look like? So when you sign up, you'll be contacted by one of our mentors. Here you see a picture of Alex and Lauren. They are both people who work with our families with Down syndrome. And what they do is they help you learn how to use the recording system and answer any questions. They show you how to record, and then you get to start recording. If participants want more support and help from the mentor, they can have as much help and support as they need. And we also just check in to see how it's going, if there's any issues, and we also get updates. So if for some reason you don't realize your microphone's not working, we can find that out before you've done a lot more recordings, and we can get that fixed and troubleshoot it with you. And then this is just a little example of what your screen looks like and what you see. So all of our prompts are in a block with clear notation. We really want to encourage people to take a break, but you can also start and stop anywhere within that block and it remembers. You can listen to the prompt, so you don't have to be able to read every word in the prompt. And you can also redo the recording up to 2 times. But the big thing we try to stress is we don't want perfect voice recordings. We want real recordings of what you're saying, because that's what's going to help the technology learn about diverse speech patterns. All our prompts are designed to represent the needs and experiences of people with Down syndrome. So if you have a family member with Parkinson's who does this as well, they'll have different prompts than you do as a person with Down syndrome, because we know we're using it in different ways for different purposes. The range of things are just common commands like turn up the volume, to answering spontaneous questions, to saying phrases that contain the most common words in English, which is what helps the machine learning isolate those different words. So the last thing is we just want to give you a little sense of what some of our participants are saying. So one of our participants with Down syndrome said she did this because I want to help people with all kinds of disabilities. I get to talk about things I like and I get to help people. And one of our caregivers said, Tamar had a great time recording and answering the questions. I believe it made her feel a part of something big. We can't help but think that one day, because of her, all who participated, Alexa, Google, Siri, etc., will be able to understand and respond to all of Tamar's questions, requests, demands, and let's not forget her music. Thank you, Sarah and the team, for this amazing opportunity. So we're really trying to hit that. We want to promote accessibility, and this is one avenue to do that as we get more tech savvy in our world. So if anyone wants to learn more or participate, we've provided you with contact information for both projects, as well as a QR code. And we also like to provide the faces of who you'll get to speak with. So for our autism screening study, you'll see Becca and Alex are our 2 coordinators. And then for speech accessibility, Alex is our coordinator there as well. We just want to thank everyone for letting us come share this with you. And we're always happy to answer any questions anytime.
Let us get to our 4th and final speaker, Dr. Natasha Marrus from Washington University. She will be discussing the infant brain imaging study.
So thank you very much for letting me come today and talk. It's really nice to hear about all the research from this group. So I'm over at Washington University School of Medicine. I'm a child psychiatrist. I got involved in the infant brain imaging study, which I will tell you about. It's more about. It's a large multi-site study that looks at developmental brain behavioral relationships starting in infancy onward. We have a branch of the study that does focus on Down syndrome and is currently collecting data in infants. So that's what I'll tell you about today. And we're hoping to also expand the study to advance to further ages, such as school age. The study is funded by NICHD. So I mentioned that we're very grateful to their support. One of the reasons we were able to get this study funded in the first place, and it was actually started by Dr. Kelly Botteron over at WashU, so I've taken over partway through. is because there's actually very little known about early brain development in Down syndrome, and particularly in infancy. And infant brain development is the fastest brain development, except maybe in utero, which is harder to do, but the fastest brain development you're going to find. And given that, children with Down syndrome, have certain profiles of strengths and weaknesses, and obviously folks have been also talking about, issues that can come up later in the lifespan, especially as they live longer. I think it's very important to know how things start, what's the foundation, and that has been a big gap in the field, which is also common in general. For whatever reason, studying younger ages is something that generally proceeds later than studying older ages in adults. In 2018, a group of researchers, actually from a neuropsychological perspective, published this review, in fact, calling pediatric brain development and Down syndrome a field in its infancy. It's been about 6 years from there. There's been more work being done. One very interesting thing about this review was that really, when you looked at childhood studies of Down syndrome, there really wasn't much of anything at that time below the age of 4 years. So again, a really big gap in the field, a big opportunity for families, to be able to help us understand early brain development in DS. And I mean, the other issue was that often the studies were relatively crude. They were not necessarily using more state-of-the-art neuroimaging techniques, or they were done in convenient samples from clinical populations, which there's nothing wrong with that, except that the studies didn't have the usual research design of, having a control with every person you study, so that you really can understand what do things that we think of as differences mean? How big are they? How representative are they? And so part of this work, was aligned to help change that. And then, another speaker mentioned, I think the last speakers, mentioned being funded by Include. So, also around the same time that our team was interested in, extending, developmental neuroimaging study to, infants with Down syndrome, Include began to be funded, through some appropriations at the, at high levels. And so in 2018, we were very fortunate that around that time there was this acknowledgement that the community of folks with Down syndrome had been, understudied, in terms of the field of, neurodevelopmental conditions, and that it was important to understand lifespan courses, and to, take a look at co-occurring conditions, which other folks have been talking about, autism in the early part of life, dementia in the later part of life, and really see how these factors influence overall quality of life and outcomes for folks with Down syndrome. And our work, as a study of infants looking at early brain development, as well as behavior development at the same time, really focused on a lot of the issues of cohort development, starting to understand and characterize, certain features of behavior early in life. We have the opportunity to look at co-occurring conditions because in this natural history perspective type approach that we use, we're able to get a lot of medical records and, have the opportunity to interact with families. And because Down syndrome is about 700 births to get enough infants to be able to take a closer look, we also had to develop a big infrastructure to be able to do this. And with being able to do this type of work, then, we were able to ask some key questions, such as, just general characterization. What are key features of brain development in Down syndrome that are different from other groups? How do these features relate to behavior and behavioral outcomes? Can we look at early brain differences if we find them to be able to give information about later outcomes, including things like autism, as well as, opportunities to build on children's strengths and to have more individualized treatment planning. And so I mentioned, that part of, the goals, of kind of just the field in general has been to develop, some more infrastructure and tools. And so this is where the infant brain imaging study came in, and so I'll just give a little bit of background on that. You can see our logos, the IBIS for the overarching infant brain stem study and then our Down syndrome wing. So the infant brain imaging study began in 2007 and was headed by Joe Piven, a neurodevelopmental researcher very well established over at the University of North Carolina. The original goal of the study was to do prospective natural history studies of infants who had a higher likelihood of developing autism. And so, back then we knew that autism was, it's a heritable condition. And so we could follow babies prospectively before the age of diagnosis and then understand what factors might be more predictive of an autism diagnosis. And our team does have a lot of expertise in autism measures and evaluations for this reason. As we developed the infrastructure more and more, we began to realize it's very hard to image babies. We would image them sleeping. We would do very detailed behavioral and developmental measures at certain ages. Our most common ages are 6, 12, and 24 months. And so basically families would come in, their babies would be assessed, again, with some very standardized measures at these ages. They'd fill out parent report questionnaires, and then the infants would do sleeping scans. And our team got very good at being able to do this across 5 sites scattered or located throughout the US. And we began to realize that we could expand this to other folks with neurodevelopmental conditions as well. And so the first extension was to Fragile X syndrome, which was somewhat in our wheelhouse, given there's an increased rate of autism there. And then Kelly Botteron, who I mentioned being the child psychiatrist who started the study, had always been fascinated by Down syndrome. And so she was just very curious about how, these children who had a lot of medical issues, could advance in their development. And she really wanted to, be able to take the infrastructure that IBIS had developed and use it for a population that really had been relatively neglected, in the neuroimaging world. And so that is how IBIS Down syndrome was born. It was kind of a fortuitous sort of intersection of, an infrastructure that we had that had been very useful for studying neurodevelopmental conditions, and then, somebody who'd really seen an opportunity, to look at this population. And so the study began in 2018 with the goal of getting 152 infants with Down syndrome and 60 control participants. And these babies are assessed very similarly to our other study groups so that we can compare across different study groups. So we can look at infants with Down syndrome at the 6, 12, 24-month ages and look at our controls. We can look at infants with Fragile X syndrome. We can look at the infants who have an increased likelihood of autism and kind of see where their developmental paths are, how they're similar and how they're different, which is a very unique thing to do. Normally studies like this last 5 years. And so if you're doing your math, it's a bit past 5 years. And part of the reason for that is COVID. Our recruitment started getting going right during the COVID pandemic. This is by necessity in-person research. And so fortunately, we've been able to extend the study. We're still recruiting. We're about 20 infants shy of our goal of 152 infants with Down syndrome. And so we're in our final year, our final push to bring those babies in. And, kind of as I mentioned before, with the background of, why study neurodevelopment, our goal is to increase this understanding of how the brain development proceeds and is affected in Down syndrome, and hopefully to identify clues that could improve assessments and guide to intervention targets, potentially earlier, especially since we're studying the infants so early. I obviously, there was a talk, the last talk about, looking at better autism screening measures. So again, you've got in this infant brain imaging study, a lot of autism experts. And so we are able to bring the pre-existing tools to bear for screening. I think we could probably use hearing, more about what other people find. It is where the field is, starting. We started with what's available, but I think even with that being said, we'll at least be able to compare with our other populations that we're studying and see where those measures maybe potentially have some, truth and where they fall short. So, these are some of the goals, that we have in mind. And so I do have just a few, examples or, some of the data that we're, we're analyzing, and yeah, just some very, simple things just to tell you. So one of the things that I remember when we started this study was that folks were very worried that our measures wouldn't even have any value. They would, there was this sense that the infants with Down syndrome would always be at the bottom levels of our measures, and that therefore we wouldn't be able to detect any variation that could help us understand how, what individual differences are there and how can we, help, different children. And what we found, through the dedication of the families, who came in at these time points was actually existing measures did show a reasonable range. And during this time period, we could also start to see points at which development with the infants, was maybe less distinct, in terms of, this is data from an adaptive function measure, the Vineland, compared to other populations, although then what you see is a widening gap as children, hit the age of 2. So yeah, so what you see here, these curves just represent scores in children in 3 groups. So in blue is Down syndrome. In green is our group of infants who have a family history of autism and who we see more likelihood of some delays. And then in red are children who don't have any known likelihood of having a developmental or neurodevelopmental condition. So you usually see that red group in the higher scores at the front of the pack. And here a score of 100 is roughly average by norms. And what I'd like to point out is that at 6 and 12 months of age, that blue group, the Down syndrome group, is certainly showing a wider range. It overlaps. You cannot just say it's one size fits all with Down syndrome. That wide range does persist, at 24 months. However, you do start to see that there's some widening of the difference between it and the other 2 groups. And so, this is definitely saying like it is important to provide supports, to these children. And we also hope to continue following to see what happens to that gap. And to understand, within this broader measure of just general adaptive function, what are the strengths and weaknesses potentially of different types of behaviors in there. And just this week, in fact, I heard about a new paper, in the journal Pediatrics, which tried to look at milestones for children with Down syndrome, just to see the variation, in their clinical population, which was thought to have a little bit more of like it's not just pulling a sample from everywhere like ours is. It's kind of more enriched for children, who may be being seen more often for medical issues. And the point just to make here is you see these blue bars for the ages at which certain language milestones are occurring. And then the different colors represent the fraction of children who are able to meet those milestones, with the dark blue meaning most kids are able to meet these milestones. This is just one population. Again, the issue with kind of taking a particular sample that may or may not be more impaired than the average Down syndrome population. But it's a broad range. There's a lot of variation here. And so certainly taking the opportunity to look at individual strengths and areas for growth, is something important to think about, and something that families can help us understand with their participation. As I mentioned, this is the infant brain imaging study. So, we're very into looking at state-of-the-art measures of the brain. I mentioned before, this is a field in its infancy, as described. One of the things that had been pointed out was, people are just looking at like overall brain volumes or big structures, not refined structures like subcortical structures shown here. And so, yeah, you've got things like the hippocampus in green, the amygdala in red, parts of the basal ganglia in other colors. And these subcortical structures are implicated in things like memory, motor function, social function, all things that are affected in Down syndrome. And so our team has been able to use very fancy machine learning techniques to really improve the quality of these segmentations, and to be able to measure volumes of these structures during early development, which is actually not hard to, or not easy to do. When you look at the scans, they're just often, the resolution just isn't very as clear early in development. And this rainbow color here is, it's just to say that again, kind of like what we're seeing with the behavior, where there's a range among, different populations or different folks with Down syndrome, there's also a kind of range of variation in terms of brain size differences or brain volume differences in different parts of the brain. So it's not as simple as saying, oh, many individuals with Down syndrome have brains that have smaller volumes than the general population. It looks like some structures are affected differently. And so our next step will be to look at these differences and relate them to behavior. So as I mentioned earlier, our infant study is still recruiting. I mentioned that it's 6, 12, 24-month time points of assessment, but we do accept children up to age 12 months. And we are understanding about the fact that there's a lot of medical procedures that are happening in that first year of life sometimes. And so, we work with families to work them in, when they're able to. I mentioned, it's a multi-site study, so there's travel incorporated to different sites. We have our Washington University site here in St. Louis. Like I said, it's developmental testing and an MRI scan. Families spend about 2 days with us, and if they're not local, we put them up in we provide accommodations at a hotel. The scans are done sleeping, so there's no sedation or anything like that, and we have a very good track record here with that at WashU, and a team of dedicated baby whisperers, who really help get them to sleep. And then we do provide compensation of $300 for a study visit. And then, just as a future direction, we're currently applying for funding to follow our infant cohort to school age, when we think we'll be better able to understand some outcomes related to, cognitive development, autism features as well. And so right now we're doing a pilot study because we recognize that we may not be able to scan some of these younger school age kids when they're asleep. So we're going to have to work with them awake. So right now we have a pilot study of what we're calling our early school age study, children 5 to 7 years of age. That's around the age that our infants will be when hopefully we're able to get some funding, to follow them longitudinally. And the study structure is fairly similar, a little simpler than our infant study, but it's going to consist of some cognitive assessments, some other developmental assessments, MRI scan with behavior prepping and coaching, to help the children be comfortable. Here are the compensations, $200, and it's a little bit of a less intense protocol since it's a pilot in some of our other studies, but we're hoping that these data will help us make our application more compelling to funders. Our study coordinator is Lisa Flake, so I put her information here. She's our coordinator for all our infant brain imaging studies, so you can call her. I know I shared the flyers. I also put down our website address. It's just the sort of banner that you would see. And yeah, thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I am so impressed that everyone was able to get out so much information in just that short amount of time. I absolutely love you all for being here. Thank you for presenting and just taking your time and collaborating with us and being leaders of the research that's happening in the Down syndrome community.